Happy Halloween. Thought for sure I'd see some costumes today.
Dressed as reporters.
That's not nearly as exciting as what you could have come, but we'll let it slide for today. Today I'm once again pleased to talk about the topic that we, and more importantly, the American people, are all very excited about: tax cuts. We're approaching the release of legislation based on the tax reform framework the president supports. Unfortunately, no matter how great the plan is for the hardworking families, Democrats are expected to criticize the tax cuts, as they've done in recent years, putting partisan politics ahead of their constituents' pocketbooks. While arguing over President Reagan's 1981 tax cuts, Democrats claimed it would only benefit the rich. The Democrat Speaker of the House at the time, Tip O'Neill, called them royal tax cuts because he claimed they favored the wealthiest Americans. What really happened was more than 14 million new jobs were created over 5 years, incomes grew by over 22% for the next 7 years, and the economy grew by over 3.5% on average for the rest of the decade. Some Democrats must have been paying attention to history, because as recently as last year, they publicly supported many of the principles for which the president is advocating today. That includes lowering the corporate tax rate, which is the highest among developed nations, so that our greatest businesses can be more competitive. In fact, Presidents Obama and Clinton both advocated for cutting corporate tax rates. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer in the past called our tax system upside down and inside out, and last year he actually admitted that cutting corporate taxes is, quote, really important for American competitiveness. Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi apparently agreed, because she said, quote, it is long past time for tax reform that would lower the corporate tax rate. The only thing that seems to have changed since then is who occupies the White House. Since day one, the president has been committed to jumpstarting our economy and giving hardworking Americans the raise they deserve. Under the framework supported by the president, our economy will grow, businesses will invest back in the country, and American workers will see their wages grow. In fact, the Council for Economic Advisors estimates that a typical hardworking American family would get a $4,000 pay raise. So to Democrats in Congress, particularly those who'd like to place American jobs and middle-class tax relief ahead of partisan politics, the question is very simple. Do you believe the American people deserve a pay raise? We certainly do, and that's what we'll be focused on and fighting for. The choice is yours. And with that, I'll take your questions. Steve?
Sarah, where does the president stand on this tax deduction for state and local taxes? That seems to be disputed up on the Hill.
Look, we've laid out our priorities for the tax cut plan. Those haven't changed. The president is going to continue working with both the House and the Senate to push forward and make sure that the principles he laid out are achieved. And we haven't made any adjustments to that at this time.
Now, what about the mortgage interest deduction?
Again, same point here. We haven't made any changes to the priorities that we've laid out. I'm not going to negotiate between you and I, but the president is going to be involved in ongoing conversations with members of both the House and Senate, and we've laid out what our priorities are, and we're going to stick to those as we move forward.
In the conversation with Speaker Ryan just now?
They're still meeting now, and we'll have a readout on that meeting once it's completed. Matthew?
Thanks, Sarah. Question on yesterday's Mueller news. President Trump's nominee to serve as chief science advisor over at the Agriculture Department is Sam Clovis, and Clovis was the campaign supervisor cited in that Papadopoulos plea, and his lawyer has since acknowledged that he was the one in that plea who encouraged Papadopoulos in August 2016 to make a trip to Russia to meet with Russian officials about the campaign. Given all that, is the president still comfortable with him, Sam Clovis, serving in the administration?
I'm not aware that any change would be necessary at this time.
And on that note, is the administration aware of who the other 3 or 4 campaign individuals who were referenced in that Papadopoulos plea were, and are any serving in or advising the administration?
I'm not aware of the specific individuals. What I can say is that I think that Papadopoulos is an example of actually somebody doing the wrong thing while the president's campaign did the right thing. All of his emails were voluntarily provided to the special counsel by the campaign, and that is what led to the process and the place that we're in right now, was the campaign fully cooperating and helping with that. What Papadopoulos did was lie, and that's on him, not on the campaign, and we can't speak for that. John?
So the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, said that this special counsel investigation has been very distracting to the president. Can you elaborate on that? What is this affecting his ability to get his job done here?
I don't think it's at all affecting his ability to get his job done, and that wasn't the point he was making. You guys seem completely obsessed with this, while there are a lot of other things happening around the country, and frankly, a lot of other things that people care a lot more about. The media refuses to cover it, and I think that's the distraction. Instead of the focus being constantly on tax cuts and tax reform, my guess is if you look at the records, the questions that I take in here day out have far more to do with an investigation that frankly most Americans don't care too much about, and a whole lot less to do with policies that actually impact them.
Why are you
Glenn?
so confident that the investigation won't go on much longer?
Because we have confidence that it's going to come to a close in short time. Glenn, go ahead. Glenn's got a call. Maybe he needed to phone a friend to get help with his question.
Sarah.
Glenn, I had more faith in you to be able to ask a question all by yourself,
The
but
other thing that General Kelly said yesterday was in reference to General Lee, and he said that the Civil War was the result of a failure to compromise. Was he suggesting that there be a compromise on the abolition of slavery? Can you expand on exactly what he was talking about?
look, all of our leaders have flaws. Washington, Jefferson, JFK, Roosevelt, Kennedy. That doesn't diminish their contributions to our country, and it certainly can't erase them from our history. And General Kelly was simply making the point that just because history isn't perfect doesn't mean that it's not our history.
Let me follow up. You are a proud daughter of the South. When you see Nathan, like a statue as they had in Memphis, of somebody like Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was responsible for the Fort Pillow massacre, and other folks like that, is there a differentiation? Do you think there are certain Confederate figures who don't deserve to be honored, like Nathan Bedford Forrest?
Look, I don't think that we should sit here and debate every moment of history. I think those moments took place. There are moments that we're going to be a lot less proud of than others, but we can't erase the fact that they happened. I think you have to determine where that line is. The president has said that those are something that should be left up to state and local governments, and that's not who I'm here representing today, so I'm not going to get into the back and forth on it. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Just to follow up on what you said yesterday and what you have reiterated today about this investigation and your belief that it's going to be wrapping up soon. Yesterday you said that those are the indications that we have at this time. From your point of view, is what you're saying wishful thinking? Is it spin? Are you getting leaked information that gives you that indication? Why do you continue to say that you believe that it is wrapping up soon?
Again, that position has not changed, and we do think that it will wrap up soon. I didn't say it would be 3 or 4 days. I said soon, and we hope that that's the case, in large part because we know that the facts are on our side. There was no collusion, and we're looking forward to moving forward and hoping that you guys can as well. And we can actually start talking about and focusing on some of the things that I mentioned to Jonathan that we feel the American people would rather the conversation be turned towards. Jessica?
At the
Sorry, I'm gonna
Papadopoulos
keep
hearing, I
moving
just
on.
want to ask you this one thing about one of the prosecutors that is on Bob Mueller's team. At the plea hearing for Mr. Papadopoulos last month, he hinted at the possibility of more to come in the investigation. He said the Mueller probe is, quote, a large-scale, ongoing investigation of which this case, the Papadopoulos case, is a small part. So, given what he said as an officer of the court, are you disagreeing with anything that he said in his remarks during that plea hearing?
Maybe his references in looking more to come between the Democrats and the Clinton campaign, since I think if there's any evidence that we've seen to date, it's between them colluding with other foreign governments, certainly not from our side. Jessica?
I have one question about what the president said today, and then an Asia trip question broadly. But the first question is, the president mentioned in the tax reform meeting there that he was going to be announcing, quote, soon, some companies that are coming back to the United States. Can you either name them or give us the industry that we're talking about?
You know I'm not going to get ahead of an announcement that the president's going to make. If he wasn't willing to tell you today, I'm certainly not going to step in and do
Asia
it.
trip, the speech that he's making at APEC is being billed as a theme for the trip, as well as the Indo-Pacific Does this administration see India as a pivotal part of your strategy when it comes to the Asia Pacific more broadly?
Certainly plays a big role, and General McMaster will be here later this week to discuss the trip in greater depth and more detail, and he'll be happy to address more of those questions at that time.
The former White House strategist Steve Bannon is saying the administration should push back harder against Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Does the president support defunding the special counsel?
No, and I'm not sure what we'd push back against, since so far all they've done is come up with ways and shown more and more that there was no connection between the Trump campaign in collusion with Russia. John?
Thank you, Sarah. 2 questions, please. First, the president is quoted last year as calling Mr. Papadopoulos, and I quote, a great guy, and today it was a liar. And I wonder, just to kind of clear the air, how well did he actually know him, and was he briefed by him often? Did he have frequent meetings? How well does he know this man?
My understanding is the only interaction he ever had was the one meeting that the advisory council gathered together, where he was in a large group of other people in the room, and to my knowledge that's the only interaction they ever had. Again, this was a campaign volunteer. He wasn't somebody that was a senior advisor, as many of you want to bill him to be. He was somebody that played a minimal role, if one at all, and was part of a voluntary advisory board.
And he
That's
only
it.
met the president, the candidate Trump, one
That's
time.
my understanding, John. That's
All
the
right.
only incident that we're aware of.
The other thing I wanted to ask was that a few weeks ago, when the president sent out Twitters about the media, he suggested that equal time be applied. Now, to many people, that was a euphemism for the fairness doctrine, something that President Ronald Reagan helped eliminate, and which Democrats such as Leader Pelosi have tried to revive. Is he seriously in favor of reviving the fairness doctrine? And I might add that its premier opponent of revival was a young congressman named Mike Pence.
I don't know that he's into the deep weeds of the fairness doctrine, but I know he certainly believes in fairness, and I think that he would like to see that applied certainly to his administration in a way that it probably hasn't been so far. Charlie?
The president, Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore is on Capitol Hill today. Does the president have plans to meet with him at any point today or this week before he leaves for Asia?
No, there's no planned meetings at this time. Blake?
Sarah, there is still a lot to be negotiated on taxes, SALT, which was just brought up, possible phasing in of the corporate rate, just to name a couple. When the tax bill, whatever of it, is released tomorrow, will the president wholeheartedly endorse this as his plan?
As of right now, we see no reason to feel otherwise, but until we see the details of that, I'm not going to speculate on where we are. We've laid out what our principles are, and we expect that piece of legislation to reflect those principles. If it does, you'll certainly see the administration come in with full-throated support.
And lastly, on the Fed, I know you're not going to give us a name. I'm not asking you to give us a name.
But what if I did? Wouldn't it be fun?
Then we would love a name.
That's the most excitement we've ever gotten out of this room. Sorry.
If you want to give us a name, we will take it. If not, my simple question is, has the president made his decision, or is he still debating it?
I can tell you that it's not Major Garrett, but beyond that, I don't have anything to weigh in on. Noah, go ahead.
Yeah, President Trump during the campaign repeatedly castigated Hillary Clinton for not coming forward and coming clean when she got debate questions ahead of the debates. Why didn't anyone in the Trump campaign, including his son, come forward when there were solicitations from Russian agents to provide dirt on his opponent?
I'm not sure how those two things are even remotely related, so I couldn't begin to figure out how to answer that
I'm just getting
question.
to the sense of the proactive duty to come clean when there is an ethical question. And is the president upset that people in his campaign did not come clean when there were ethical questions
I
and
don't believe that
ethical
to be
lines
an
being
ethical
broached?
question. That's a pretty standard campaign operating procedure.
The Russians is?
That's not collaboration with the Russians. Sorry, Noah. I know you want it to be, but it just isn't. Go ahead.
I have two questions. The first one is, you've been very clear that Trump didn't collude, but Hillary did. What is your definition of collusion?
Well, I think the exchanging millions of dollars to create false information is a pretty big indication. I think taking millions of dollars into a foundation that benefits you while making decisions that impact people that gave that money, I think those are certainly areas of collusion that should certainly be looked at.
And my second
Stephen,
question about,
sorry.
just to follow up from Glenn, Robert E. Lee aside, and I understand your point about how all leaders have flaws, what Kelly said yesterday was that an inability to compromise led to the Civil War, and back in the spring, the president said that he thinks that Andrew Jackson could have made a deal to avert the war. What is the compromise that they're talking about? To leave the southern states slave and the northern states free? What was the compromise that could have been made?
I don't know that I'm going to get into debating the Civil War, but I do know that many historians, including Shelby Foote in Ken Burns' famous Civil War documentary, agree that a failure to compromise was a cause of the Civil War. There are a lot of historians that think that, and there are a lot of different versions of those compromises. I'm not going to get up here and relitigate the Civil War, but there's certainly, I think, some historical documentation that many people, and there's pretty strong consensus, people from the left, the right, the north, and the south, that believe that if some of the individuals engaged had been willing to come to some compromises on different things, then it may not have occurred.
Compromise on old
Sarah, thanks, Sarah. Apropos of what's going on the Hill this afternoon, and Facebook disclosing yesterday that more than 100 million Americans were apparently exposed to what amounts to Russian propaganda. What's the White House's view of that notion that more than 100,000 people have been reading and watching what this Russian outlet has been putting out? And what do you make of the notion that there ought to be some kind of requirement that Facebook be required to disclose, the way that many broadcasters are required to disclose, when political ads are made?
I think we need to see how this process works out over the next several days. And some of those questions are things that you're going to have to ask Facebook. That's not something that the federal government can weigh in at this point until the findings of that investigation and those hearings are completed. Hallie?
I'd like to follow up on something you said earlier, but I also want to follow up on the conversation that's been happening about this slavery compromise. I'm not asking you to relitigate the Civil War. We don't need a history lesson on the compromises that have happened. But does the White House at least acknowledge that the Chief of Staff's comments are deeply offensive to some folks and historically inaccurate?
No, because as I said before, I think that you can't, because you don't like history doesn't mean that you can erase it and pretend that it didn't happen. And I think that's the point that General Kelly was trying to make. To try to create something and push a narrative that simply doesn't exist is just frankly outrageous and absurd. I think the fact that we keep trying to drive, the media continues to want to make this and push that this is some sort of a racially charged and divided White House. Frankly, the only people I see stoking political racism right now are the people in the groups that are running ads like the one you saw take place in Virginia earlier this week. That's the type of thing that I think really is a problem, and I think it is absurd and disgraceful to keep trying to make comments and take them out of context and mean something they simply don't.
Sarah, I'm not trying to drive a narrative, Sarah. Sarah, can I follow up on that?
There's a new poll out that shows that the public seems to trust many of the mainstream media outlets that the president criticizes more than they trust the president himself. Why do you think this would be, and do you think the White House agrees with that?
I haven't seen anything to suggest that. I'd have to look into it. I certainly can't comment on some study I know nothing about and don't agree with.
Sarah, given some of the criticism we've heard from the president's outside advisors, is the president happy with his legal team right now? Does he feel well represented, well defended when it comes to the Mueller probe particularly?
I'm not sure how he couldn't, considering, as I said yesterday and I've repeated several times today, all of the revelations that have taken place over the last several days and hours have nothing to do with the president, have nothing to do with his campaign. And I think the further we get into it, the more and more we see that happening.
Sorry,
Kevin?
one other question on
Thank you,
something
Sarah.
said.
I just wanted to ask about taxes and then maybe just a very quick follow on the discussion about compromise. If I'm understanding you correctly, what you're really saying is he's not suggesting a compromise on slavery. He's talking about other compromises that may have been germane to that period of history.
Look, I think that was
Is
part of the
fair?
conversation that a lot of people have had. He didn't get into the specifics because that's something that's been discussed very widely by many historians, again, from both the left, the right, the north, the south, however you want to look at it. And he didn't get into the details of it because it wasn't the point he was making.
On taxes, just want to get a sense of what the president might really be interested in as far as the child tax credit and as far as the Obamacare individual mandate. Is it your opinion that the president would be supportive of both, meaning that they need to be a major tenet of the tax reform that we'll be unveiling this week?
He certainly supports the child care tax credit. I'm sorry, what was the other piece you're asking
The
about?
Obamacare individual mandate, does that have to be a part of tax reform?
I don't believe it has to be part of tax reform, but the child care tax credit is something he'd certainly like to see. Take one last question, Major.
Sarah, you said to us a few moments ago, the Papadopoulos plea agreement is an example of an individual doing the wrong thing, but the campaign doing the right thing, if I remember what you said correctly. Does that extend to Sam Clovis encouraging George Papadopoulos to go to Russia on behalf of the campaign to solicit information?
My understanding is there wasn't encouragement. He made multiple attempts at setting up a variety of meetings that were constantly rebuffed. He also made false statements to investigators. That's something that the campaign nor the administration would ever support. All of his emails, again, were voluntarily provided to the special counsel by the campaign, and that is how they got to the place that they're in right now.
Are you saying that Clovis is being misinterpreted by George Papadopoulos?
I'm not getting into the detail of that. I'm talking specifically about the multiple attempts that he made in setting up a variety of meetings. There were more than one instance in which he tried to set up meetings that were rebuffed by the campaign. He lied about a lot of those activities, and that is the place that you, I think, see come through in the emails that were voluntarily turned over.
One thing you said yesterday, you were asked at one point during yesterday's briefing when the president became aware that Russia was behind the hacking and possession of emails. You said, I'm not sure of the specific date of when that took place, so I'd have to look and get back to you.
Yeah, I can respond to that now. The president was briefed in a pretty widely publicized meeting back in January. Later that very day, he said publicly that he'd received the intelligence briefing and he believed that Russia was behind the email hacks. Thanks so much, guys. Hope you have a happy and safe Halloween. Thanks, guys.
Sarah, does this administration believe